the small town of Hollow Creek, Halloween was a big deal. Every year, the town came alive with decorations, kids went trick-or-treating, and the adults threw elaborate parties. But this Halloween felt different to Emma. Maybe it was the fog that had settled thick over the town, or the way the cold seemed to bite a little harder. But she shook it off. She had a party to attend. Emma's friend, Luke, was hosting the event at his parents' house, a massive Victorian mansion that sat on the edge of town. It had been the site of many legendary Halloween parties over the years, with its creaky wooden floors, secret passages, and a reputation for being haunted. Luke always leaned into the mansion's spooky vibe, turning every room into a different Halloween-themed experience. When Emma arrived, the house was buzzing with people in costume. Vampires, zombies, and monsters roamed the rooms, while eerie music played in the background. Luke had outdone himself again. The mansion was covered in spider webs, fake blood splattered on the walls, and skeletons hung from the chandeliers. Emma joined her friends in the living room, where they sat around telling ghost stories and daring each other to explore the darker corners of the house. As the night went on, Emma noticed a strange guest standing in the corner of the room. He wore a plain, white mask that covered his entire face, with small, hollow eye holes that were impossible to see through. He was dressed in a long, dark coat, the collar pulled up high around his neck. At first, she assumed it was just one of Luke's friends playing a prank. Luke loved to scare his guests. But as the night went on, Emma couldn't shake the feeling that something was off about him. The masked guest never spoke or moved much. He just watched from the shadows, silently observing the partygoers. Whenever Emma tried to point him out to her friends, he seemed to disappear into the crowd, only to reappear in another part of the house. She brushed it off as a harmless prank and tried to enjoy the party. But when she went to the kitchen to grab a drink, she found herself alone with him. He stood across the room, his head tilted slightly as if studying her. "Nice costume," she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice wavered slightly. The masked guest didn't respond. He just tilted his head a little further. Emma felt a chill run down her spine. She forced a smile and quickly left the kitchen, rejoining her friends. But the encounter lingered in her mind, making her feel uneasy. As the party continued, Emma noticed that other people were beginning to talk about the masked guest, wondering who he was. A few people even joked about how good his creepy act was. But when Emma asked Luke directly if he knew the guy, his face went pale. "I didn't invite anyone with that costume," he said, glancing around. "I thought he was one of your friends." A nervous energy rippled through the group. They searched for the masked guest, but every time they thought they had spotted him, he seemed to vanish into thin air. Then, at midnight, the power went out. The mansion was plunged into darkness, the only light coming from the dim glow of candles scattered throughout the rooms. Nervous laughter filled the air as people pulled out their phones to use as flashlights. Luke went to check the fuse box, but the tension in the air was palpable. That's when Emma heard it, a soft whisper, like someone breathing right next to her ear. She turned quickly, expecting to see one of her friends, but instead, she found herself face to face with the masked guest. His white mask loomed inches from her face, the empty eye holes staring into her soul. She stumbled back, her breath hitching in her throat. "What? What do you want?" For the first time, he moved, raising a single finger to his lips in a silent gesture. Fear clawed at her chest, and she bolted back to the living room, shouting for Luke. But when she got there, she found the room completely empty. Everyone seemed to have disappeared, and the house was deathly silent. She ran through the mansion, calling out to her friends, but no one answered. All she could hear was the sound of her own footsteps echoing in the empty halls. The party was gone, and she was alone with the masked guest. In a panic, she rushed to the front door, yanking on the handle, but it wouldn't budge. It was as if the house itself was holding her inside. She ran to the back door, then to the windows, but every exit was locked tight. And then she heard it again, the soft sound of breathing, just behind her. Emma spun around, but the masked guest wasn't there. Instead, he stood at the top of the grand staircase, his head cocked to the side, watching her. With nowhere else to go, Emma darted up the stairs, desperate to put as much distance between herself and the figure as possible. She stumbled through the darkened hallways, finally finding refuge in one of the old bedrooms. She locked the door behind her, pressing her ear to the wood, listening for any sound of footsteps. But all she heard was silence. She stayed in the room for what felt like an eternity, her heart hammering in her chest. Just when she thought it might be safe, a soft knock came from the other side of the door. "Emma," a voice whispered, distorted and inhuman. "Let me in." She backed away from the door, her legs shaking. There was no way anyone could know her name, no way any of this could be real. She grabbed an old lamp from the nightstand, ready to defend herself. Suddenly, the door flew open, and the masked guest stood in the doorway, his white mask glowing eerily in the candlelight. Emma swung the lamp at him, but he moved faster than she thought possible, catching her wrist in a vice-like grip. The mask tilted down toward her, so close she could see the darkness swirling behind those hollow eye holes. "You shouldn't have come here," he whispered, his voice echoing with 1,000 others. "This place is mine." With a sudden burst of strength, Emma pulled free and ran, stumbling back down the stairs. But when she reached the bottom, she found herself back in the kitchen, as if the house itself had twisted its hallways. And there, sitting at the kitchen table, was the masked guest, waiting for her. She turned to run again, but this time she was too slow. A cold hand clamped down on her shoulder, spinning her around to face the mask. The last thing Emma saw was the mask slipping upward, revealing a face that twisted and morphed into something too horrible to comprehend, something ancient and filled with malice. Her scream echoed through the empty mansion, but no one outside heard it. The next morning, when Luke's parents returned home, they found the mansion in perfect order, as if no party had ever taken place. There were no signs of a struggle, no broken decorations, just silence. But when they went into the kitchen, they found a single, plain white mask lying on the table, and a strange message scratched into the wood: "She came to my party. Now she stays forever." And Emma? She was never seen again. In the heart of a quiet suburb, surrounded by manicured lawns and carefully maintained homes, sat the Holleridge House, a large, looming mansion that had fallen into disrepair. The locals whispered that it had a dark history, that strange occurrences happened within its walls. But over time, the stories became local legends, told to scare children and teenagers on Halloween night. This year, a group of high school seniors decided to test the tales. They were determined to throw the best Halloween party the town had ever seen, inside the Holleridge House. Cameron, the ringleader, convinced his friends that the mansion was the perfect setting. It had the eerie atmosphere, a creaky old structure, and a basement that could double as a haunted dungeon. They broke in a week before Halloween to clean up the place and set up decorations, plastic skeletons, flickering lights, and fake cobwebs. They found old furniture covered with dusty sheets and even discovered a large, tarnished mirror that they propped up against the wall in the main hall. On the night of the party, dozens of teens gathered outside the gates of the Holleridge House. Dressed in costumes, they carried drinks, snacks, and a stereo. Cameron unlocked the front door, pushing it open with a dramatic flourish. "Welcome to the Holleridge House," he announced with a grin. As the teens flooded inside, the atmosphere shifted from eerie to electric. Music blared through the dusty halls, and kids danced, drank, and explored the rooms that had been empty for decades. But as the night wore on, things began to take a strange turn. Emma, one of Cameron's friends, wandered into the old dining room with a few others, laughing and chatting. They stumbled upon the massive mirror that Cameron had found earlier, its surface warped and darkened with age. One of the boys dared her to say, "Bloody Mary," 3 times, like in the old legends. She rolled her eyes but played along. "Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary, Bloody Mary," she chanted, her voice mocking. They all laughed, but when Emma looked into the mirror again, she froze. For a split second, she saw a shadowy figure standing behind her, just outside the frame. A tall woman with hollow, sunken eyes, her face stretched into a grin too wide for her gaunt features. Emma spun around, but there was no one there. "Did you see that?" she asked, her voice wavering. The others just shrugged, thinking she was trying to scare them. But Emma's unease lingered, and she stuck close to her friends for the rest of the night. In the basement, where Cameron had set up a makeshift dance floor with dim red lights, strange noises began to creep into the music. Low whispers, like someone muttering under their breath, filtered through the speakers. At first, everyone thought it was just part of the Halloween ambience, but then the whispers became clearer, the words darker. "Get out," a voice hissed through the music, almost drowned by the beat. "You shouldn't be here." One by one, the dancers began to notice. Some joked about it, while others started looking around nervously. Cameron, feeling the shift in the mood, tried to brush it off as a prank. "Relax, it's probably just the old wiring," he said, but even he didn't believe his own words. Upstairs, a group of kids had found their way into the master bedroom. They laughed as they explored, poking through old wardrobes and making jokes about the haunted reputation. But then, the door slammed shut behind them, the handle twisting as if by an unseen hand. They rushed to the door, but it wouldn't budge, no matter how hard they pulled. "Let us out. Come on, this isn't funny," one of them shouted, pounding on the door. They heard footsteps outside, slow and shuffling, but when they looked under the crack at the bottom of the door, they saw nothing but shadows. And then they heard a whisper, soft, barely audible. "You're not welcome here." Panic set in, and one of the boys smashed a window to escape, cutting his hands on the glass. The others followed him, climbing out onto the roof and scrambling down the old trellis to the safety of the backyard. When they finally regrouped with the others, they told Cameron what had happened. Down in the basement, the music cut out completely, plunging the party into silence. The air grew cold, and the flickering lights cast strange shadows across the room. People began to murmur about leaving, sensing that something was very wrong. But when they headed for the front door, they found it locked from the outside. "That's not possible," Cameron muttered, his bravado fading. He had the keys, but when he tried them in the lock, they didn't fit anymore. A chill ran through the room as the shadows in the mirror seemed to deepen, twisting and moving on their own. Emma's voice trembled as she pointed at the reflection. "Look. In the mirror." Everyone turned, and they saw them, figures standing in the background, barely visible in the dim light. Shadowy forms that moved closer to the glass, their faces pale and distorted, eyes wide with a hunger that made their stomachs twist. Then, the figures stepped forward, out of the mirror and into the room. Panic erupted as the shadowy figures moved through the crowd, their hands reaching for anyone they could touch. Their fingers were ice cold, leaving burning marks on the skin of those they touched. People pushed and shoved, desperate to escape, but there was nowhere to go. Cameron shouted for everyone to head for the back door, leading them through the twisting hallways of the mansion. But as they reached the door, one of the shadowy figures materialized in front of them, its face inches from Cameron's. Its mouth stretched wide, revealing rows of needle-like teeth. "You came to my house," it rasped. "Now you'll never leave." Cameron swung at the figure with a broken piece of wood, but it passed right through, the figure dissolving into a cloud of black smoke that wrapped around him. He fell to the ground, gasping for breath as the smoke seeped into his lungs. Emma and the others managed to break a window near the back of the house, crawling out into the cold night air. They ran, never looking back, leaving the haunted mansion behind them. When they reached the safety of the street, they turned to see the front door of the Holloridge house creak open. The shadowy figures stood in the doorway, watching them with those hollow, hungry eyes. Cameron never made it out. The next morning, when the police arrived, they found the mansion empty, no signs of a party, no decorations, nothing to suggest that anyone had been there. But in the basement, they found a dusty old stereo, its power cord frayed and sparking. And on the mirror in the dining room, written in blood-red letters, was a message, some guests never leave. Emma and her friends moved away from Hollow Creek after graduation, trying to forget the events of that night. But every Halloween, she still has nightmares of the Hollowridge house, of the shadowy figures, of Cameron's face twisting in terror, and of the voice whispering through the darkness, "You'll be back. You always come back." Jacob didn't know why he had agreed to attend Olivia's Halloween party. He'd never liked large gatherings, but Olivia had been persistent, and there was something about the way she asked that made it hard for him to refuse. So, on Halloween night, he found himself dressed as a vampire and heading to her place, deep in the heart of their small town. Olivia's house was old, one of those sprawling Victorian homes with turrets and stained glass windows. It was a perfect backdrop for a Halloween party, with the front porch lit up by flickering jack-o'-lanterns and fake cobwebs hanging from the trees. When Jacob arrived, the house was packed with people in all sorts of costumes, witches, skeletons, zombies, and more. The music was loud, and the air smelled of punch and candy. He found Olivia near the living room, dressed as a ghostly bride. "Hey! I'm glad you made it," she said, giving him a quick hug. "The party's just getting started." Jacob forced a smile and tried to relax. He mingled with a few classmates, grabbed a cup of punch, and settled into a corner, watching the others dance and laugh. But as the night went on, he couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. He noticed a man standing near the back of the room. He was tall, dressed in a jet-black suit, with a mask covering his face, a twisted devil's mask, its red horns curling upwards and a wide, unsettling grin. At first, Jacob thought it was just another costume, but the longer he watched, the more uncomfortable he felt. The man didn't move, didn't join in the fun. He just stood there, staring at the crowd with those hollow eyes behind the mask. Whenever Jacob glanced back, the devil-faced figure seemed to be looking right at him. "Hey, Olivia," Jacob called out as she passed by. "Who's the guy in the devil costume?" Olivia turned to look but frowned. "What guy? I don't see anyone like that." Jacob gestured towards the back of the room, but when he looked again, the man was gone. He laughed it off nervously. "Guess I've had too much punch." But as the night went on, he kept seeing the masked figure, always in the background, lurking just beyond the reach of the party lights. Once, he thought he saw the figure standing on the staircase, looking down at the partygoers with that eerie grin. Another time, it was outside the window, standing perfectly still, even as the cold October wind blew through the yard. Jacob tried to shake off the unease, but when he went upstairs to find the bathroom, he saw the man again, this time, at the end of the hallway. The figure stood motionless, the mask's twisted grin seeming to stretch even wider. Jacob's heart raced, and he turned back down the stairs, hurrying to find Olivia. He found her in the kitchen, chatting with a group of friends. "Olivia, I'm serious, who is that guy in the devil mask?" "He's creeping me out," Jacob said, his voice urgent. She gave him a concerned look. "Jacob, I swear, I didn't invite anyone in a devil costume." Just then, a few other guests joined them, asking if anyone knew the man who kept walking through the halls in a devil's mask. Everyone assumed he was a friend of a friend, but no one could pinpoint who had brought him. Olivia's unease grew, and she decided to confront the man. But when they searched the house, room by room, he was nowhere to be found. Jacob felt a chill crawl up his spine when he looked out the window and saw the masked figure standing in the front yard, staring directly at him. Olivia, frustrated and spooked, decided to call the party to an end. Most of the guests were disappointed but didn't argue, sensing the tension in the air. Jacob stayed behind to help her clean up, keeping an eye out for the strange figure outside. As the last of the guests left, Olivia locked the front door and turned back to Jacob. "Thanks for helping me out. I don't know what that guy's problem was, but it's freaking me out." Jacob nodded. "Yeah, I don't," he froze mid-sentence. Through the window, he saw the devil-masked figure again, this time, closer, standing just outside the front porch. His breath caught in his throat as he realized that there was no way the man could have moved so silently or so quickly. He reached for Olivia's arm. "He's right outside. We need to call the police." But before they could move, there was a loud bang on the front door. They jumped, and Olivia grabbed her phone, dialing the police while Jacob stood frozen, staring at the door. The banging grew louder, more insistent, and they backed away as far as they could. When the police arrived, they found the door ajar, swinging on its rusty hinges. Olivia and Jacob were huddled in the living room, pale and trembling. The officers searched the property but found no trace of the masked man. One of the officers, an older gentleman who had lived in the town for years, frowned when he heard their description. "Years ago, a man used to live in this house, a real piece of work, they say. Wore a devil mask to scare people on Halloween. But he disappeared one night, and the house has been empty ever since." Olivia's face drained of color. "You're saying he's a ghost?" The officer shook his head. "Could be someone playing a prank. But if I were you, I'd stay away from this place on Halloween." As they left the house that night, Jacob took one last look at the front yard. He swore he saw a figure standing in the shadows, the devil mask glinting under the moonlight, the grin growing ever wider. But when he blinked, the figure was gone, leaving only the whisper of the wind through the empty yard. Mia had always loved Halloween. She thrived on the thrill of the spooky atmosphere, the eerie decorations, and the chance to dress up as anyone she wanted. This year, her college dorm had thrown a massive Halloween bash, with students from every corner of the campus cramming into the small space. She spent weeks perfecting her costume, a vintage-inspired vampire, with a black velvet dress and intricate makeup. When she arrived at the party, she was thrilled to find that everyone had gone all out. There were pirates, witches, ghosts, and clowns, enough creativity to fill a horror film. As the night went on, the party got rowdier, with drinks flowing freely and the music booming so loud that the floors vibrated. Mia danced with her friends, taking in the festive energy around her. But as she spun around, she noticed a figure standing at the edge of the dance floor. It was a man in a jester costume, a blood-red outfit with bells on his hat. His mask was twisted into a mocking grin, the painted lips curling up to his eyes. At first, Mia thought he was just another partygoer, but something about his stillness unnerved her. He didn't join the dancing or interact with anyone, he just watched. She tried to ignore him, but every time she glanced over, he was there, his head tilted slightly, as if he was studying her. When she mentioned him to her friends, they shrugged it off. "It's Halloween, Mia. Everyone's just being weird." She decided to brush it off, telling herself that it was probably just a creepy costume choice. But later in the night, she went to the bathroom and found herself alone in the dim hallway. She heard the jingle of bells and turned to see the jester standing at the end of the corridor. "Hey, nice costume," she said, trying to sound casual, but her voice shook. The jester didn't respond. Instead, he lifted a hand and pointed directly at her. The smile on the mask seemed to stretch wider, the eyes glinting with something dark. Mia's heart pounded, and she hurried back into the crowded room, but when she turned around, he was gone. She told herself it was just some guy playing a prank, but the unease stayed with her for the rest of the night. As the party began to wind down, Mia decided to leave early. She gathered her things and stepped out into the cool October air, but as she walked down the empty street, she heard the faint jingle of bells behind her. She quickened her pace, glancing back, but saw only shadows. When she reached her apartment, she shut the door behind her, trying to catch her breath. But then she froze. On her bed, there was a note, a small card with a twisted jester's grin drawn on it. And below, written in red ink, were the words, "Next time, your costume is mine." Mia never found out who left the note or how they got into her apartment. But every Halloween since, she's heard the jingle of bells behind her, always just out of sight, always watching. And she hasn't dressed up for Halloween ever again. Every year, the residents of Maple Street held a Halloween block party, a tradition that brought the small town together. It was a night of fun, laughter, and harmless scares, until the year everything changed. The Johnsons hosted the event that year, turning their spacious backyard into a festive maze of spooky decorations, with cobwebs, plastic skeletons, and a fog machine that filled the air with a thick mist. Everyone on Maple Street was there, wearing costumes ranging from classic witches to movie characters. The atmosphere buzzed with excitement, especially as the night grew darker and more mysterious. Elena and her friends, Sam and Jack, were in their final year of high school, and they considered themselves a bit too old to be spooked by Halloween scares. But even they were caught up in the eerie vibe of the evening. They spent most of the night laughing at the haunted attractions and enjoying the free candy. But as the party carried on, Elena noticed something strange, a figure lingering at the edge of the backyard, just beyond the glow of the orange fairy lights. The figure was dressed in a plain, old-fashioned suit and a white, featureless mask that covered his entire face. He stood perfectly still, hands by his sides, watching the festivities. Elena squinted, thinking it might be one of the neighbors playing a prank, but she didn't recognize the figure's build. "Hey, Jack, do you see that guy?" Elena whispered, nudging him. Jack glanced over and shrugged. "Probably someone from the next block trying to be spooky. Ignore him." But it wasn't that easy for Elena. Every time she looked over, the figure was in the same spot, unmoving, unblinking. A chill crept up her spine, and she decided to go and ask the Johnsons if they knew who it was. She found Mrs. Johnson near the refreshment table, chatting with other neighbors. "Hey, Mrs. Johnson, do you know who that is?" Elena asked, pointing to the man in the mask. Mrs. Johnson followed her gesture but frowned. "Who, dear? I don't see anyone." Elena turned back to the spot, but the figure was gone. She forced a laugh, feeling embarrassed. "Never mind, I must have imagined it." But the unease didn't leave her. As the night went on, she kept catching glimpses of the masked figure, standing in different corners of the yard, always just beyond the lights. Once, she saw him standing behind the row of jack-o'-lanterns, the flickering candlelight reflecting off his blank mask. "Did you see him again?" Sam asked, noticing Elena's distracted look. "Yeah," Elena whispered, "but he keeps disappearing whenever I point him out. I think someone's messing with us." They decided to stick together for the rest of the night, thinking they could catch whoever was behind the creepy costume. But as they made their way through the maze of decorations, the air seemed to grow colder, and the laughter of the party faded into the background. Suddenly, Jack froze, pointing to the far side of the yard. "There he is. Behind the shed." Elena and Sam turned to see the masked figure, partially hidden behind the Johnsons' weathered garden shed. This time, they moved toward him, determined to confront the prankster. But as they approached, the figure stepped back into the darkness, moving with an unsettling, jerky motion. It wasn't like someone walking, it was more like a marionette being yanked by invisible strings. Elena's breath hitched, and she felt a chill seep into her bones. "This doesn't feel right, guys." But Jack pressed on. "Come on, it's just someone messing with us." They rounded the corner of the shed, expecting to find the masked man crouched behind it. Instead, they found nothing. Just shadows stretching across the backyard, the wind rustling through the overgrown grass. "Where did he go?" Sam asked, her voice barely a whisper. "I don't know," Jack muttered, scanning the dark yard. "There's no way he could have just disappeared." But then, they heard it, a low, distorted laugh, like a broken record playing in the night air. It was coming from the woods just beyond the Johnsons' yard, where the trees loomed like dark sentinels against the starry sky. Elena grabbed Jack's arm. "Let's just go back to the party. This isn't funny anymore." They hurried back to the gathering, trying to shake off the unnerving encounter. But when they returned to the backyard, they found the party had taken a grim turn. Mrs. Johnson was standing near the fire pit, looking pale and shaken. "What's going on?" Elena asked. Mrs. Johnson swallowed hard, her voice trembling. "I just found this on the porch." She held up a white, featureless mask, identical to the one they had seen. But this one was stained with something dark, something that looked like dried blood. Elena felt her heart stop. "Where did it come from?" "I don't know," Mrs. Johnson whispered. "But I locked the front door, and no one's been near the porch all night." The neighbors exchanged uneasy glances, and someone suggested calling the police, but in the end, they wrote it off as a Halloween prank. The party began to wind down, and guests left in small groups, uneasy but trying to laugh it off. Elena, Jack, and Sam walked home together, but the image of the blood-stained mask lingered in their minds. As they passed by the woods, Elena caught one last glimpse of the masked figure standing among the trees, his head tilted to one side, his empty face turned towards them. She froze, grabbing her friend's arms. But when they looked again, the figure had vanished, leaving only the sound of the wind whispering through the leaves. They never spoke of the masked man again, but every Halloween, they'd find a white mask left on their doorsteps, stained with that same dark red. And deep down, they knew that whoever, or whatever, wore that mask was still out there, watching, waiting for the next Halloween night to come. Love these stories? YouTube algorithm suggests that you would like to listen to these stories. Click on the video on the screen.